From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan, alongside my partner, the Professor Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Matt, with your permission, I'd like to get very technical today. The small business owner, during the course of his growth, confronts certain crossroads, okay? Whether it's starting the business, whether it's once you start it, then trying to scale it, and then maybe you've scaled it, achieved some success, then you have to try to come up with some sort of succession planning. There's a lot of innate decision-making and pivots and approaches that have to change and evolve in the small business sphere. Now, I'm not smart enough to talk about all this stuff. So today, as a guest, we have Scott Ritzheimer. He's a scale architect, and Matt, what this guy has done is tremendous. He's broken down the founder evolution into 7 stages. Scott, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for your time and expertise. And please share with the audience the founder's evolution and the 7 privileged stages of the journey.
Yeah. Well, Lou, Matt, thanks so much for having me here. I'm super excited about being on the show. I always get excited starting a new podcast because a podcast literally changed the course and trajectory of my life. Started me on a process of transformation inside my business that allowed us to triple our bottom line in a single year. Allowed me to do just what you're talking about and scale up and ultimately sell my business and do what I do now and help other founders and business owners all day, every day, doing what I absolutely love. So hopefully this will have that impact for someone out there. This will be the right thing at the right time, and I'm excited to share it. What is it? This founder's evolution. So we don't want to get too technical, right? Because founders, that's technical, they're out, right? We're not going to be boring with this. We'll have some fun with it. And what I like to kind of open up this idea. Why does this matter? Why do these different stages matter? With a story, it's football-ish season, right? Whether your team is still in or not, or is kind of irrelevant. But there's a football analogy I like to use for those of you here in the U.S. This will make sense. It's true of any sport, though. So let's imagine it's a big game. It's 4th down and 3 yards to go. You're down by 4, so you got to get a touchdown to get in and win. You get a touchdown, you win. You don't get a touchdown, you lose. You've got just the right play for it. It's a fake to the running back up the middle, and then a quick toss over the shoulder of your star receiver in the end zone. And you've run it 1,000 times. You know how to do it. You know how to execute perfectly. You call the play. Everyone lines up. But what's different this time than all those other times is you're not on the field. You're standing there on the sideline, and the best that you can do is hope and pray that you made the right call and you trained your folks well enough. So what happens? They hike the ball, and it works, right? The deception works. Everyone collapses on the hole, and the quarterback takes a step back to throw. And you're like elated, just nanoseconds have passed, but you're just processing all this in real time. And so you pan to the left to look for your receiver, see what they're doing. And horror of horrors, they got the play call wrong. They're blocking. They're not going to be in the end zone in time for this pass. That's a time play and it's coming. And so without a moment's hesitation, what do? Coach on the sideline, you take off running down that sideline as fast as you possibly can, right? Headset goes flying off. You chuck your clipboard and hit one of your assistant coaches. They're going to study the math on this, or the physics on it, because no one can figure out how you ran that fast, that quickly. But somehow you get there just in time to make a diving catch in the end zone. And what you expect, all those times in the past as a player, you made those diving catches. What happened? The crowd goes wild. But here it is, 80,000 people watching, and you could hear a pin drop, right? Silence. Nobody knows what to say. Nobody can really figure out what just happened. What would have been one of the most celebrated acts is now a laughingstock for you and your team. It's an embarrassment. Your best players are shaking their head in shame. What would have been the winning play is now a penalty. And never in the history of sports that I'm aware of has a coach violated the sideline, run into the field of play, and won the game for their team, right? Or tried to win the game for their team. But in working with founders and business owners, and if I look back at what I was doing whenever I was a founder, we do this every single day inside our businesses. And we're exhausted because of it. Our people are frustrated because of it. We can't figure out how to grow because of it. All of that stems from one primary problem, and that is that you don't know what role you're supposed to be filling right now. The game has changed. The stage that you're in as a founder and CEO has changed. And the skill sets of the past, making diving catches, running fast, reading a defense instantaneously, all of those things that brought you success in the past, in the business world, making the sale, right? Hustling to get the job done, working all weekend to pull together a project proposal. All those things that you did that were the heroic efforts that brought you this far are the very same thing they're going to hold you back. And that's why it's so important to recognize these stages, is because what worked in one stage, the better you are at it, the more necessarily you will be thrust into the next stage, which demands that you show up differently with a different skill set.
All right, we're sold.
So what
That's
are these
awesome.
stages, right? We'll hit them really quickly, and then I want to dive into a couple that I think would be most pertinent, or some of the hardest, the more challenging times. So
Thank you, Scott.
to overdo our sports analogy here a little bit, just because it makes it easy to understand it and kind of point at what's happening in these stages. The very first stage actually happens pre-launch, and I call it the dissatisfied employee. Right. Yeah. You've seen this. What founder, when they go back and tell their story, hasn't had an experience that thrust them out of a comfort of what's usually a well-paying job, right? Whether it's a manager that micromanaged them, or a schedule that didn't give them the freedom they want, or an arbitrary limit on sales commissions that prevented them from making more money. There's something in them that just thinks, hey, there's a better way. And the mistake that we make in this stage is that it's not comfortable, right? Being dissatisfied is not what any of us longs for. And so we try to resolve that dissatisfaction as quickly as possible. We try to jump in and hang our shingle as quickly as we can. And what happens is we miss the opportunity to be that trainee, to learn the game, right? Because how many times have you seen this? Just because you're a great mentor doesn't mean you're going to build a great coaching business. Just because you're a great roofer doesn't mean you're going to build a great roofing business, right? Just because you're a great hairdresser doesn't mean that you know how to build a great hairdressing business.
It's a very different skill set. You're absolutely right.
That's exactly right. And so what we need to do is actually have the humility and the patience. This is hard. It's so hard. But if we can have the humility and patience to learn the rules of the game, right? What are the actual ground rules of the game, and do that before we make the leap, it's a lot easier, it's a lot less risky, and it is way less painful. So that's stage one. I call it the dissatisfied employee. The goal here is to be a great trainee, to learn how the game is played.
Now, is that a common genesis, or is it one of many? Because there are some people that go into entrepreneurship because they're unemployable. They've got a chip on their shoulder. They can do it better than anybody else. They don't take orders well, and they just figure, you know what? I'm just going to be my own boss. Right? But I don't know if that's entrepreneurship. That's just being unemployable.
Yeah, and I would say when I'm looking at there are a lot of dissatisfied people who are not entrepreneurs. Right? Just because you're a dissatisfied employee or a dissatisfied person overall, just because you don't want a boss doesn't inherently make you an entrepreneur. So I would say, are all of them employees? No. When you look at the data of successful organizations that move through, a significant portion of them are. And also a significant portion of them are when you look at the average wages most folks who go on to successfully launch businesses are making somewhere between 125 and 150% of the average salary for folks in their position. So, the idea of kind of the guy, in his underwear in his mom's basement, that's a little bit of a myth, right? When you look at what's really happening, most of the
Scott,
time they're
never
coming out
has there been a successful entrepreneur that started in his underwear in his mom's basement. Never. In the history of
No, I wouldn't say. Yeah, I don't know that it's never, right? There's not a whole lot of
never.
absolutes.
No, never. You bring it to me.
Yeah. So
Wait a second. I get an email from some guy that says I make $1 million a year in my pajamas. Does that count?
Hey, go for it, right? So what we're not looking at, this is not a set of rules, right? What it is it's a set of patterns, universal patterns. In fact, the patterns that I've leveraged that finally shed light on what these different stages are, they actually don't come from the business world at all. They come from storytelling. They come from story structures that existed for thousands of years. And one of the things that you see, so even if you're not an employee, the employee part is not the operative word here. It's the dissatisfaction that matters. Because let's face it, like if we're honest, if you can do anything other than start a business, you should probably go do that because it's going to be a lot easier, right? When you look at those who start businesses, who stick with it through those early days, there's this sense of like, sure, I could do anything else, but nothing else would satisfy me. This is what I have to do. So I would say it's universal in the sense that there's a dissatisfaction that drives folks to launching their own business, whether they're an employee or not, is less consequential.
Now, is that initial stage, like what you define as a stage, is it the realization that this person has that mindset and now we move on to stage 2? Or is it just the evolved state of, from a caterpillar to a butterfly? How's this work?
It's a little bit of both. I would say what it is it really kicks off. It really initiates when that frustration hits a boiling point and they decide I'm going to start a business, right? That's when stage 1 starts. Now, stage 1 finishes when they actually start the business. So the transition point is one of the clearest ones from stage 1, the dissatisfied employee, to stage 2, the startup entrepreneur. That's when you go full time. So for me, if it's a part-time side hustle, we've not quite come into that second part of the second stage yet. If it's something you're just dreaming about doing, that you're not in that second stage yet, that second stage, the transition point is when you go full-time and you hang your shingle and say, hey, we're going to make this happen.
All right. So now stage 2, you bought the lemons, you're squeezing it, you've got the lemonade stand. What's stage 2?
So stage 2, again, it's called the startup entrepreneur. And you know that being an entrepreneur is basically sitting on the beach and having 2 pina coladas and singing Garth Brooks songs, right? That's how this works these days. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. That's not it at all, right? It's hard. It's hard work, but it's glorious work, right? My favorite definition of an entrepreneur is someone who goes from working 40 hours for someone else to working 80 hours for themselves and not getting paid anything to do it, right? It's just you get in there, but it's there's a vitality to it. There's an excitement and enthusiasm to it, and so we walk around with what I call the entrepreneur smile, and it's kind of like this, it's almost a little grimace, a little smile, because we're excited that we're doing it, but it's really, really hard. You'll face more rejection in 2 years than most people will in 2 lifetimes. You'll suffer more setbacks in those early days than most people could ever withstand. And so the goal here is actually quite simple. You want to be great at what you do. And so what I liken it to, the parallel position is being a star player on the field, right? You got to get out there and you got to learn how to close business. You got to get out there and learn how to do whatever it is you do. If it's just you, it's up to you. You've got to have some basic knowledge on the admin side of things. You've got to be really good at what you need to do for this thing to work. You actually don't need to be a great leader. To an extent, you don't need to be a great strategist. There's a lot of things that you don't need to do at this stage. You need to win the next play. You need to win the next deal, and then you need to get up and you need to do it all over again. And what happens is as we do that, as you become better, as you start learning how to close deals more, as you find your market, as you start building business, more clients means more work. More work means more people, right? And so you start bringing on folks to help. It's usually whoever has a heartbeat or whoever is related to you or someone that is related to you, right? We bring in anybody that we can bring in to help us to get the work done. And we wake up one morning. It doesn't necessarily happen all at once, but we find ourselves one morning, and the defining question, Monday as we get up is, what is wrong with these people? Right? Like what? Because we've got a handful of employees around now, and they're driving us crazy, right? They have all these questions. They don't do things the way that we do. They don't think like we do. They don't take ownership like we do. They're just different from us, and it's driving us nuts. And when you wake up with that feeling, when you have that sentiment where you feel like you're just constantly running into frustrations with your people, what's happened is you've stepped into stage 3, and I call it the reluctant manager. And the reason I call it that is there's not a founder I've ever met who started their business with the vision of managing people. Right. There are much easier ways of managing people, right? There are much easier ways of getting management roles. And when you look at what makes a visionary founder, they're usually not all that interested in the detail of management, right? They're not really all that they don't love holding people accountable. They love dreaming and going after new ideas and pursuing new opportunities. And so you have this person who's just kind of naturally wired to not be a manager, and you put them in a situation and bring people around them who naturally need a manager, and it creates a frustration. And what adds to that frustration, what makes folks really, really feel it, is not only do they not think like you, they don't do like you, they don't take ownership like you do. You have to sell 3 and 4 and 5 times as much to make sure that they all can put food on the table for their families. And there's this resentment that can build for folks in these early days, this being a reluctant manager. And what they need to do is they need to learn to shift from being a star player, from focusing on what you need to do and your job, right? Your real work. And you have to start to learn to focus on what we need to do. You have to become a captain on the field. Make sense?
Makes total sense, Scott. Thank you. Matt, hit home a little bit?
A little bit.
A little bit. See, Matt and I, we love people. We really do. We love people. But we also hate people and hate having to deal with them. So we love our clients and we love our team, but the human element is that it's the love potion, but it's also the poison, right? Because you need to give that warm hand holding and a good bedside manner to close the deal. But if you're operating at a certain scale and you're dealing with a lot of people every day, day in, day out, it definitely takes its toll. The one thing that's helped Matt and I is we have very different personalities. We tend to develop the good cop, Matthew, bad cop, Luigi. So I'm always delivering the bad news. Matt's always delivering the good news, and it fits our personalities. But yes, stage 3 for an entrepreneur founder, yeah, it's tricky. It's critical. It's tough to go from the star quarterback to the team captain because it's a different mindset. Because the team captain doesn't necessarily need to be the best player in the team, but he has to have those leadership qualities.
Well, you have to figure out what's going to drive the people in the field too. Are they motivated by the carrot or the stick?
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah, it really boils down to, and one of the big disservices that I think a lot of leadership training does is it almost casts management as a lesser activity. Like leadership is good, management is bad, or managers are small-minded people who don't think big picture, and leaders are big picture thinkers who save the world. And so when
Scott,
visionaries
that's also a little bit the fault of like the American stereotype of the U.S. middle manager, right? He can't 100%. He or she can't do anything well, so let's stick him in middle management and like lay there for 40 years until you retire.
Well, and here's the other part that makes this really hard for founders in particular is that a captain on the field has the disadvantage of still having their own job to do. Right? You take a founder and say, "Hey, you need to get great at managing, or you need to learn the skill set of hiring the right people." They'd be like, "Great, when am I going to do that?" Because they've got so much work to do. When you look at this stage, there's a lot that has to happen. And depending on how much a star player you were, how dependent the organization still is on you, the less time you actually have to be a captain. It's something I call the star player paradox. And that is, the more adept you are, the better you are as a star player, the harder it is to transition to the captain on the field mentality.
Scott, that is so difficult to do. And I'm only imagining how difficult that could be, because we have two people here fulfilling those two roles, right? For lack of a better term, and there's always overlapping, because Matt and I, we have, besides being partners, we're friends. So there's always overlapping. I'm the team captain, but my frustration is Matt is our best salesperson. But I can't have him on the floor selling all day long, because he's so critical for the business and for the clients with everything else he does. So if he's selling all day, the business suffers. But if he doesn't sell a lot, the business suffers, right? So it's finding that Goldilocks zone for the small business owner. Man, you really touched on something special here.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you guys are already doing is actually one of the key ingredients and that is, you have to have the ability to divide and conquer. You need somebody in your organization who can help you to manage. Now, you have to learn to manage first, because otherwise you won't be able to hold them accountable or know if they're doing a good job. But you have to learn the basic skills of management, and then you've got to find a number two. And I don't mean that in a lesser sense. I mean that you need to introduce somebody else to your leadership circle. And when you have partners, it's one of the distinct advantages and why partners tend to get to the 15, 25 person milestone faster than a lot of solo guys do, or ladies. And by doing that, what that allows us to do is focus on sales and growth, because those are kind of they're the same thing at this stage, and then also make sure that the trains are running on time. Again, another sports analogy. I'm not super crazy about sports; they're just helpful visuals. We want to separate offense from defense, right? We want one person to be our captain of the field on defense, and another person to be captain on the field on offense. And that's where we start to get the traction that we need to lift us up out of it. Now, what you're talking about here, go ahead. You have a thought on that?
No, I was just wondering what stage 4 was, because we were such we'll pick up some momentum. I love this.
That's where we are. So stage 4, what is it? And we're thinking stage 4, if I can get these people to do the right thing, it's all going to be okay. Right. Or if I can get this business to $1 million or $5 million or $100 million, it's going to be okay. If I can there's some type of milestone that we're looking for. Might be spoken, might be unspoken. Usually it's not yours. It's what somebody else did. But there's this idea that, hey, this is hard, but once I get to a certain point, it's going to be okay. We'll have enough resources to hire the people we need. We'll have enough market share to have the traction that I'm looking for. And another big American myth is this idea that this journey is up and to the right. Right? We kind of think as we're progressing through these stages, they're going to get better and better and better. And, the move from startup entrepreneur, where it's like, it's up to me and I'm going to make it happen. It's hard, but it seems like it's a glove that fits. The reluctant manager actually feels like it's a little bit of a step down. Like, I went from being a visionary to being a manager, right? I went from having ideas and executing on them to now I feel like I'm wiping butts and cleaning people's messes. Like this, it feels worse actually. And so we can't wait to get out of it. And the good news is you can get out of it. We already talked about doing that, separating offense from defense, focusing on learning the basic skills of management. But when you do, and it's not all bad, but when you do, you step into stage 4. And stage 4 is what I call the disillusioned leader. And it's like, this is all warm and fuzzy. All right. This is a wonderful, wonderful podcast. Thanks, Scott. We really appreciate it. And what the disillusioned leader stage is, I'll pull from a non-sports analogy here for us for a moment. You remember or not remember, but there's the movie Top Gun Maverick, right? The new one with Tom Cruise. And so my wife and I went on a date night, and as romantic as we are, we went and watched Top Gun Maverick, and it was actually a blast. It's a cool,
I can't imagine something more romantic than that.
Yeah. And so we're having a good time. We're watching the movie, but as you watch the movie, the first kind of, 80, 90 minutes of it, it's pretty rough. Like, Tom doesn't have the girl. She's turned him down a couple times now. He's got conflict with his wingman's son. His bosses hate him. His students are failing. The mission's not going to happen. Like, it's everything that can go wrong goes wrong in that movie. And then they go out on the mission and it gets worse, right? Like, they accomplish the mission, but like Tom Cruise gets shot down 5 times. I don't know exactly what happens, but right around this time, Tom's on the ground. He's getting shot at by a helicopter. And we get a phone call from the babysitter, like, SOS, we need you to come home. Now, everyone was healthy. Everyone was happy, but we had a 0-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And it's just hard for a babysitter to wrangle all that the Ritzheimers had to offer at that stage. So we go home. I missed the last 15, 20 minutes of Top Gun Maverick. It took me 2 years to see the end of the movie. I kind of had an idea of how it ends, but if you stop that movie there, it's actually kind of depressing, right? It's not a fun story up to that point. And when you look at just about any great movie, pick your favorite epic, heroic journey. There's this moment about 15, 20 minutes from the end of the story that's just plain awful, right? Everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. We're down at the bottom of the belly of the story, and it's really, really hard. And that's what stage 4 is as a disillusioned leader, because what happens is we get to some of those milestones that we've created that we think will bring us the success and happiness we're looking for. We continue to hire great people. We start to crack the code on that. And we get people who really are good at what they do. And they start taking things off of our plate. And this really weird, we start feeling sidelined, right? Like, we almost feel like we're pushed out of the way a little bit. We feel like the coach on the sideline. And that's fine when we're winning the game, but that's really, really hard when we're losing. And a natural and inevitable part of the business growth process is that the things that were working in those early days will start to falter. You'll enter into this stage where there's just complexity inside the business. This is the challenge of scaling up. And when things start to go wrong and you find yourself woefully dependent on other people to fix them, it's a really scary place for a founder, right? It pushes all the ego buttons. Even if you don't have a big ego, you feel it. And we start to wonder, is this it? Is this really what I've done all this work for all these years for? Is this really why I've taken all these risks? Is this really what leading a business is all about? And there's this disillusioning and frustration that starts to set in. But much like the movie, we can't stop the movie there, right? That's not the end of the story. And what feels in many ways like the end, right? It feels like this is as far as I can take the company, or this is as big as we can get, or this is as much as the market will support. It's actually only about the middle of the story. You are one step away from the single biggest transformation in your personal journey as a founder. You're only one step away from the biggest business transformation that's available to you. And that's when you step into stage 5. And I call stage 5 the chief executive. Now, granted, this is a title you've been using since your first business card. I get that, right? Like, we make the first business founder and CEO. But if we're honest, right, if you were to hire somebody else into your role in those early days, it's not a CEO role. It's a sales role, right? Or a manager role, or a lead consultant role, or whatever the business line is that you're doing. It's not actually a CEO role. Here's the really, really good news about that. when you're down in stage 4, disillusioned leader, and you think, I don't know how to make this thing go up and to the right, because you feel like it's more of what you've experienced so far, it isn't. Being a CEO is actually something that the vast majority of visionary founders I've worked with, I've seen, I've helped, and I've helped a lot of them. It is actually another one of those gloves that fits really well. And most folks cannot survive for 4 or 5 years in stage 4, the disillusioned leader, without some really taking a heavy toll. Sometimes on them, sometimes on their business, sometimes on their marriage or their children, their friendships. But the great news is that CEO role, when you really look at what it takes to succeed there, visionary founders can be in that role and love it for 5, 10, 15. I've seen folks do it for 30 years, because being a CEO, focusing back on being a visionary again, leading your company into the future, and building a strong executive team around you who can carry it on the day to day, that is a really, really special place for a founder to be.
And on that note, let's segue into stage 6.
What is stage 6? So where do we go from here, right? CEO, like, we've done it. We finally earned the title on our business card. But the reality of it is, you'll start realizing, hey, I'm not going to do this forever. And you have to answer the question, what's going to happen to the business when I'm gone? In fact, before you can even ask that, the defining question for stage 5, and this is a weird one for folks who aren't there. It's hard to believe that this is true, but you ask anyone in stage 5 or who's been through stage 5 and in 6 or 7 later, the defining question is, who am I? Right? If I'm not founder of this business, if I'm not the entrepreneur who made this happen, if I am not my business, if you separate me from the business I'm in, what's left? You've given so much to your business over all these years. There is work that needs to be done to start to separate those two. And it's necessary, because it's the only way to consistently and effectively make the transition from stage 5, the CEO, the chief executive, to stage 6, which I call the true owner. Now, true owner, this is stage 6 of the process. Can I tell you how many folks in stage 2 are trying to act like true owners? Right? It is so common now in
All of us.
our entrepreneur culture to, like, I want to own and not run my business. And I wholeheartedly believe that is a worthy endeavor, but it is not what you do in stage 2. You've got to get through stage 3 and stage 4 and stage 5 before you can really build a company that's capable of sustaining that transition, before you can establish the strengths and skills and understanding that you need to do that well, to stay out of the way of your successor, and to build an organization that can continue to scale even when you leave. And that's what true owners do. They learn the skill set. They learn to build a team that can take the company further in the founder's absence than the founder could themselves.
Scott, let's touch on that just for a brief second here, because another American myth is we will live forever and no one can do it better than me. And my son's not going to take it over. My foreman's not going to take it over. My manager's not going to take it over. And a lot of small business entrepreneurs fail to plan a succession, right? The stats tell us that's true, unfortunately. How do you persuade or convince, because you're not going to tell an entrepreneur egomaniac what to do. How do you persuade him or her how critical that is?
So I don't think that's my job, right? Because I think that what I've been able to do, and what has made it so much easier for them to understand is, I guess, it's persuasion, but by laying out the stages, by helping them recognize how the journey changes over time, and most importantly, getting them to define what success actually is for them, right? What do you want? What do you want when you leave? How do you want this to go? Do you want to sell and maximize your value coming out of it, and who cares what happens after that? If so, that's fine. I have nothing wrong with that. That's a strategy. What I've found, though, for most founders, when you get them reconnected with their vision for the company back in stage 4 and 5, when you help them walk through the ego side of this problem, which is a lot of those excuses that you talked about there are actually fear They come from, I don't know what I'm going to do, right? I was 35 when I got to this point. I'm like, I've got so much of my life left. Like, I'm not going to retire right now. And so what I've found is the number one thing is you've got to have a vision for it, right? If you have a vision for staying in that seat, I work in the church world a lot, and some pastors, they're just going to die with a mic on, like that, and that's more power to you, right? Like that's not in the best interest of your organization, but you started it, you get to pick that. I really believe that founders have that right. There's a responsibility associated with it. That's another story. But what I've found is necessary is to get a vision for what's next. You have to move to something, not just from something. There is only so much golf and grandkids and gallivanting that you can do, right? For most vision, that's not going to fulfill them. And so a key ingredient that's going to help you separate from the business enough to create the space for your successor to succeed is for you to have a vision for what's next after the company. It's an essential piece. Now, another thing that you mentioned in your comment there, almost in passing, is your son, your manager, your foreman aren't going to take it over. None of those people are highly likely to be a great CEO, right? When you look at the son, most visionary leaders, it's interesting when you look at it, they don't tend to have visionary children. Especially their oldest. Their oldest tends to be what we call an operator. Now, that's a pattern. It's not a rule. But more often than not, your children are not your best successors. Now, they can benefit from the company, but they may not benefit from being the CEO in the company. And I can, for 9 times out of 10, what makes a great manager, a great number 2, a great foreman is the opposite of what it takes to be a great CEO, to be a great visionary leader. And so what makes this stage so hard, and it's why we have to get to stage 5 to do this well, is that it takes time to find and develop and trust the next CEO of your company.
So at what stage do you and your team start to implement SOPs and systems and processes for your clients?
Yes, great question. So there are several very different types of systems and processes. So the first set of systems and processes that we tend to implement are your kind of SOPs. Call them frontline procedures. We call them operator processes. They are things that folks who are natural operators who get stuff done. They are the basic requirements that they need to make sure that they do good work and we all stay out of jail. Right. That's about the threshold. So one of the things that can happen is we conflate that with some of the processes that are needed later to scale, the real structures that enable scalability. We will smother our small organization, right? We'll just slow it down. We'll grind it to a halt. It'll lose its nimbility. It'll lose its agility. It'll lose its ability to pivot and adapt and bend over backwards to which are the competitive advantage of any small business. So in stage 3, part of those skills of being a good manager are the awareness of the ability to create and the acceptance and willingness to support those simple processes that are needed for your frontline workers to do great work, right? Those simple SOPs. So stage 3, a significant portion of that is learning to lead through very, very simple rudimentary processes and being willing to bend them a little bit, but not as much as you would naturally like. So it's more process than you as a visionary would like, but it's way less process than some other people we call processors would like. So that's stage 3, simple processes. They're about ensuring consistent quality for your customers. That's the goal, right? Consistent quality for your customers. Now, once we get to stage 4, we actually need to significantly up our system and process game to get to stage 5. We actually need to bring in people who think in terms of system and process. Again, we call them processors. We need to not just build system SOPs for our frontline workers. We have to start to systematize how we make decisions as leaders. We actually need to build processes for our decision making. We need to build processes for how we align every action of our team members. We actually even need to make processes for how we empower our team members. And so there's a much richer, a much deeper level of process that has to come to make the transition from stage 4 to stage 5.
I feel a drum roll coming. Are we ready for stage 7?
Stage 7. So what's left, right? We've become the true owner. We have a vibrant CEO with an amazing executive team at their back, driving the company forward, dreaming about things that you never even thought of before, right? It's just a wonderful, wonderful success. You're mentoring them, and you're taking home a big fat distribution check. What's left? Well, what happens at this point is, we don't just kind of ride off into the sunset. You can if you want to, but if you want to get to stage 7, which is what I call the visionary founder, it's where you've got to go and get back into the game. You get back into the game, but purely for the love of the game. I'm working through this transition with one of my clients right now, and the CEO is transitioning out to an ownership role so that he can transition into the head of president of their industry association. And he's got these big, big dreams for how they can change and reshape their industry to tackle some of the biggest problems that have been there for his entire 30-year career. And so the visionary founder is when the visionary entrepreneur realizes it's not about me anymore. They go from being the hero in the story to being a guide in someone else's story. Sometimes it looks like coaching. Sometimes it looks like speaking. Sometimes it looks like having a new book. Sometimes it looks like giving back in mentoring programs. Sometimes it looks like contributing to industry associations, and sometimes it's getting back into the game and starting all over again. But that visionary founder is where we realize, hey, the end story is not just nothing. The end story is we use everything we've learned so far to make the road easier for those who will follow in our footsteps. There's this Greek proverb that I absolutely love, and I think it explains this stage so well. And it is that a society will grow great when old men plant trees under whose shade they'll never sit. We begin to do work, hard work, disciplined work, not so that we can benefit from it ourselves, but so that those who walk the road behind us can have an easier journey.
Mr. Ritzheimer, Mr. Scale Architect, you've built us a beautiful 7-story founders program, and Frank Lloyd Wright would be proud. Can you tell the audience where they could find yourself and the rest of your Scale architecture team?
Yep. If you look up Scale Architects on any of the platforms, we're on all of them. If you head over to scalearchitects.com, especially scalearchitects.com/founders, you can actually get a free copy of the book that talks about all 7 stages. And one of the things we didn't get a chance to do in this conversation, but you'll find in the book, there's 2 things there. One is 2 or 3 simple tactics or strategies that you need at that stage. And the really, really cool thing about those couple of strategies is that by virtue of knowing what those 2 or 3 things are, the 20 or 30 things you're doing right now that you don't actually need to be doing. So folks who've written back to me have saved somewhere around an average of 10 hours per week by just focusing in on the things they need to do for the stage they're in right now. The second thing that's in there, and what I want to leave folks with, again, scalearchitects.com/founders, is that joy does not come from a destination, right? We talked about how hard that stage 4 is. And a big part of why it's so disillusioning is we've put so much of our joy and happiness and anticipation on hold for some kind of arbitrary event in the future. Joy doesn't come from a destination. It comes from the journey. And one of the things that I do in the book, I actually end each chapter with this because I think it's the most important thing to remember, is that there is something really special about every single stage, no matter how hard it is. If you go to someone who's in a later stage, they will look back on those times and say, man, I wish I had that again. So no matter how hard it is right now, there is something about your story that folks who you see as far more successful would love to have again. So don't give it up while you have it. Enjoy every moment of it.
Scott, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. Got one question for you before we let you run. We ran over and I really enjoyed this episode, right? Number 4, you keep harping on that. What are some things business owners can do to get out of that stage?
The first thing that you have to do is you have to recognize that you and your company need systems and processes, right? Up to this point, you've got some systems in there. Anytime you create a new system, who do you think it's for? Everyone but you as the founder. And what's got you stuck in that stage is that you're the one who's violating those systems. And so remember what we talked about in that opening anecdote of the sideline. You have to recognize what the sidelines are. You have to recognize that, yes, you're founder and no one there is going to tell you can or can't do anything, but there are things that you should and should not do. And you need to get clear on what those boundaries are, and you need to stop crossing over those white lines and interrupting your team. The second thing you need to do is you need to start building an executive team. Not just a leadership team of folks who do what you tell them to do, a group of executives who are skilled at making decisions with you, right? The role of an executive team is to tell you no when you're taking an unnecessary risk. The role of an executive team is to focus on everything that we need to do to hit our goals for this quarter and this year, to free you up to focus on the things we need to be doing now for our goals next year, and 3 years from now, and 10 years from now. So learn to love systems and processes, learn to actively embrace and support them, and start building an executive team that can make decisions with you. And you'll find the pressure and the intensity and all the things that are weighing you down will slowly but surely start to lift. And the more you do it, the more the dominoes will start to fall, and you'll find yourself in stage 5, the chief executive.
Scott, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this one. Guys, that's a wrap of the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of the Liquid Lunch Project.